Hey everyone, welcome back. I know I disappeared for a while, but I'm back now. I wanted to talk to you guys today about working in Blender to create knitwear visualizations. This is an example of what I've achieved with textures that I created in Substance Painter and then bringing everything into Blender for rendering with geometry nodes and with displacement applied to the mesh that comes from Clo3D. So this process uses Clo, Substance Sampler, Substance Painter, and Blender to get this result. I showed in a previous video how to get this similar result in Clo3D, but you'll find that you're kind of stuck in the Clo3D environment when you use the first system in Clo. This doesn't use the first system in Blender. This actually uses a custom geometry node setup that I will share with you guys. The result is quite nice. We have some fuzz around the garment. There's a nice displacement of the knit texture itself. If I zoom in on this one, there's different ways we can control the fuzz and the displacement and everything. These are some examples that I managed to create with this workflow. The goal is to kind of get this natural kind of hairy look on the fabric with this fuzz and the little particles coming out. One thing to note is we need some tileable knit textures for this. So if I place these next to each other, they repeat seamlessly. So we need this kind of seamless repeat for our textures. There's videos where I can show you guys how to do this, how to set this up, or you work with a texture that's already tiled. To start off with, we're going to jump into Clo. So this is my Clo file. It's a very simple sweater. There's nothing very special about it, but one thing to note is that I have the geometry set to quads optimized. So my mesh type here is set to quad optimized. And this should give us a better result on the displacement when we start to subdivide things in Blender for a nice kind of, displacement on where we want all the knit cables and stitches and everything. That's the main thing to note about the Clo file. Obviously, if I go to the UV editor, I have this laid out quite efficiently in UV space. I've laid the body pattern pieces next to each other so that if my knit kind of goes across the seam, they should kind of continue. If I have them set like this, then my cables and my knit stitches won't go, in the same direction. So just consider the UV layout before you export your garment from Clo, just to make sure it looks as you want it. The first thing we want to do is actually take one of our textures. So in this video, I'm going to use this one. And we're going to put this into Substance Sampler in order to create a base material, and then bring everything into Substance Painter to create the final textures for the sweater. And then in the next part of this two-part series, I'm going to show you how to set everything up in Blender. So this first part is going to be about the texture creation, and the second part is going to be about how to bring everything to Blender and set up the displacement and the fur and everything. So for now, let's jump into Substance Sampler. Just before I jump into Sampler, one thing to note about this, I'm going to export this as a thin mesh. So my export settings are going to look like this. I'm going to do an OBJ export. I'm going to put it in my folder. I'm going to put it in my project folder. I'll just save it as sweater for now. The export settings would be thin, weld, single object, select all patterns. I don't need the avatar or anything else. I want the unified UV coordinates, but I don't need any textures associated to it. If you don't have this checked, it's not going to export your UV, so make sure you have this checked. Meters is for Blender, and then this I'm just going to generally ignore. But this is the setup, so thin, weld, single object, and that should work really well for the modifiers that we want to add in Blender. So don't do this as a thick export as much as you might want to. Do it as a thin and a welded, and then export from there. So Substance Sampler, if you've not been here before, it can be quite straightforward, but you just need to know where to look. Quite simply, I'm going to click on this option when I open it up called Convert Image to Material. I'm going to drag my image in, so I have a resources folder here. It's going to be, let's maybe do this one as the texture that we want to create. So I'm going to drag this over here and drop it in. I'm going to set the category to fabric. I'm going to keep the type of material to matte for now. There's obviously a lot of presets you can work with here, but I want a fabric one. And then I want to click create. And this will just run a quick process of turning that image into a material. And because it's obviously already a tiled material, we should have kind of a seamless texture visible on our preview over here. If you're new to Sampler, there's ways that we can change how we look at things. So for example, we have a displacement option here. This is the material view. There's a texture tiling option here. So if I want less tiles, I can bring it down. If I want more, I can bring it up. By default, it stops at 3, but if I override this by just typing into the box, I can set this to 5, for example. You can rotate and you can offset everything, but for now, this is fine to work with. In your shade, the settings, no. View, mesh. In the mesh view, you can set this to, you could put a t-shirt in, you could put a last of a shoe in, you could put a cube in. From my side, I just find it easy enough to work with the sphere. You could put it on this cloth view. But for now, I'm just going to leave it set to this sphere preview. Quite like Substance Painter, if you press Shift and right click, you can rotate the light. If I press Alt and left click, I can rotate the sphere. And if I roll my middle mouse button, I can zoom in and out. So that's just a quick explanation of the UI. Then we want to look at some of the settings. So for the displacement, the scale is currently set really low, and just be aware that these settings aren't actually going to get exported. This is just how we visualize things in our preview. What we really want to be aware of when we're building the textures is what things look like over here in our texture preview. So you have base color, normal, roughness, metallic, height, and ambient occlusion. And we want to edit these before we start to export everything. So for now, I'm just going to go back to base color. On the displacement option here, I'm just going to set the height scale a little bit higher, and you'll see that we start to get some much more detailed displacement start to happen. If you push the quality up, you're going to get more kind of subdivision or tessellation of this mesh preview, and you're going to see a lot more kind of detail. Obviously, this isn't exactly what we want, so we need to make some changes, but this is how we can control that displacement. But again, it's not affecting our texture maps, it's just affecting how we visualize the displacement. So I'm going to leave this quality probably set to 0.5 and the scale for now set to 0.6. And then we want to look on our material on the side and see if there is any settings that we want to change. So if I click image to material over here, this is where we're going to be able to change some of the settings of our displacement and our texture setup in general. To start off with, I'm going to just give this a name and call it knit gray cable. And if you see here, there's a little asterisk next to this, which means this file is not saved. So if I go to File, Save As, I'm going to put it in my sampler folder and just call it knit2 because I already have one from when I ran this before. Click Save. And now that asterisk should be gone and this project is saved. Obviously, if I start to make changes, that'll come back, but that's what that little asterisk means over there. Geometry details. We have micro details, medium details, and large. So this is going to affect our height map. So I'm going to look at the height map to start off with. If I bring micro details all the way down, you'll see what'll start to happen. Like some of those really sharp little pointy edges start to disappear. If I bring medium details all the way down, we're going to get less of those details in terms of like the medium size, let's say. And if I bring large details all the way down, we're going to get rid of everything. If I push large details up, it's going to make the cables increase in kind of thickness. So you want to find a balance between large, medium, and micro. And honestly, some of this micro detail you probably don't want because it just gets really spiky when we see it inside the displacement. So I'm going to keep this really low, maybe like 0.05. The medium details is more the size of like each of these individual stitches. So if I increase that a little bit, you're going to see like our stitch details get a little bit more improved. And obviously if I push the large details all the way up, it's going to take these larger sections into account. So obviously that is adapting, or it's changing our height map as we make those changes. I might actually just reduce this even more. I'm looking like here, but I'm also looking up here for like how jagged, spiky this is on the edges. And you know, we could bring it all the way down and just see what it looks like. We do want some detail coming through in this, so just spend a minute to like tweak it to like how you want it, and then zoom out, move the lights around a bit, see what we think. Yeah, this is looking okay, I think, for a start. Of course, you can look at displacement again and increase the scale, and you'll see a little better how this is getting projected onto our mesh. The light, we might want to experiment with some different kind of lights. But that is going to kind of set up our height map and our displacement, like what we will use for the displacement in Blender in the end. The ambient occlusion strength is basically the shadows that we would see like between things. So it's where ambient light is going to be occluded. That's why it's named as such. You might want to increase this a bit to like get a bit more detail in some of the shadow areas. And this is what our ambient occlusion mask is going to start to look like. One thing we do want to consider is the base color and this thing called de-lighting intensity. So if I just open up this texture in preview, right? This is what my texture looks like just the image file, like the high res kind of scanned version. And then this is what Sampler is doing. It's kind of flattening out some of the light that already exists. So like there's obviously a light source in this image. It's highlighting up here, there's shadows down here and everything. And what Sampler does will kind of de-light this. So instead of having this light visible in the texture, it's going to remove it so that when we shine our light on it in 3D texturing, or in 3D rendering even, it should be kind of more accurate. The issue is we might get a bit of detail loss, so we might want to tweak this value slightly, because right now this looks very kind of flat and gray. And if I bring this de-lighting intensity down, we can bring some of that shadow back, but it still looks quite good in terms of the texture detail. So that's how we can get this de-lighting intensity tweaked. The roughness, in general, this is like a cotton yarn, I would say, and we want it to appear quite rough. If you want the base value to be like a bit shinier, you could bring this down. If you want to increase the variance, you could do so. But in general, we want this to be kind of quite consistent, but not too flat. The albedo importance we can change as well, which will start to flatten this out a little bit. So yeah, that can affect our the shine basically of this. And as I said, we don't want this to be very shiny. And if we want to make it very shiny, we can do so in inside Blender itself. You can obviously switch to like the shiny option and you're going to get a much more reflective fabric. So if you're using something like a silk, you know, or something that you want a shine on in Sampler, then this would be how to do it, but we want to stick to matte for now. So spend a minute to kind of just tweak these few parameters that there are. I mean, in general, if you've already got a tiled texture, this is quite a nice way to set up your material ready for use in other 3D software. So we get, you know, all the texture maps that we want to work with. When this is ready, there's two like options to get this out of Sampler and into Substance Painter. I'm just going to save it again, so Control and S to save it. We have this button on the side over here called Export. You can send this straight to Substance Painter. So you could click, it'll pack it into a material and it'll just send it straight over to Substance Painter. Or you can do Export As. So if I were going to export this, I have my tutorial folder set up. I can call it Knit Gray Cable. I'm going to create a subfolder because I could have multiple materials within this project. Like I could have a whole series of knits over the textures that I'm working on. And then this will export each one of those into a subfolder. For the settings, my presets Blender Cycle /Eevee. So like this we know he's going to set the normal map in the right way. I think we can, go more in detail here, but I really don't need to. So I'm going to set this to Blender. It's going to give me base color, normal, roughness, displacement. If I want metallic alpha and emissive, I can do, but I have no metallic information here. I have no alpha information and I have no emissive, so I don't really need those. And the format I want is PNG. I'm going to click export, and it will just simply export those as a series of textures, of like image textures that we can work with wherever. And then if I want to send this directly to Painter, I can just click here, send to 3D Painter, and it's going to just open up Painter for me, and that material will appear inside Substance Painter. So depending on which way you want to go with this, you could use both those options, and I'll show you how they both look inside Painter in a second. So now that I'm done with Sampler, I'm going to open Painter, or it's already opened here, and my material will appear in my Painter library. So if I go to, for knit, set this to show all. I have knit gray cable, which is the one we just made, and that's coming as like a material over here. For now, we want to import the mesh, and then we can start to work on top of that. So, like I said, from Clo, I exported this as an OBJ. I didn't need anything more complex. I just needed the OBJ with the thin welder settings, and I'm just going to drop this in here. I want my template to be metallic roughness alpha blend, which is kind of the standard that I use for these types of projects. If it's not set to that by default, just make sure it is. PBR metallic roughness alpha blend, which is a lot to say, but it's all the things that we kind of need. The normal map format should be OpenGL because that's what we use inside Blender. The resolution I'm going to set to 2K, so 2048. I'm going to leave the UDIM workflow checked, and the rest of this I can just leave as it is for now. I'm going to click OK. And my mesh is imported, and I have my Clo mesh visible here in Substance Painter. So I've done a series on Substance Painter before. It's quite straightforward in the UI. If I press Shift and right click, I'm going to rotate my light. If I press Alt and left click on the keyboard on my mouse, I'm going to rotate my object. Scroll in and out on my mouse is going to zoom in and out. If I middle click on my mouse over here, or Alt and middle click on my mouse, I'm going to pan. Same over here, I'm going to pan. And that's pretty much the UI that we need to be aware of at this point. We can bring in our texture now. So we've got this gray knit cable over here. I'm just going to drag this in and then go up here and delete this default layer that gets applied. I can increase the tiling amount to get something that I like the look of. So maybe something like this. And then if I want to shift like what's being viewed, I can take this gizmo here and just like shift where it's being viewed. I could rotate it to an angle. But for now, I'm just going to leave it kind of perpendicular and do something like this. You can see that we don't have any displacement, but if I look up here on my height channel, so I'm going to drop this menu down up here. This is viewing my material. If I click height, I do have my bump map imported from Substance Sampler. And if I go back to my material, it's actually looking really low resolution, and I'm wondering why that is right now. Let's maybe try importing them as image textures, because if I look here, this is pretty low res and my texture settings is set to 2048. So let's just import these from our export folder that we had before. So I'm going to go to my sampler folder, exports, knit gray cable. And if I look at this, I have some detail in there. Look at the normal map as well. Yeah, let's do this. Let's do this more manually. I think it might be even more interesting. So I'm going to import these 4 image textures, just drag them onto my library on the side. I'm going to highlight all of them at once, so just click and drag. Turn from undefined to texture, and this will import all these images as texture. I'm going to import them to my library so I can use it in multiple projects at the same, like, if I want to work on a different garment. You can set it to project if it's project specific, but I could use this anywhere. And then I'm just going to click import. And that'll take a second, and it will just import all my textures over here. I'm going to delete this layer, and I'm going to add a new fill layer. And just click the bucket, that's the fill. And if I scroll down, I want a color input, I want a height input, I want a roughness, and I want a normal input. So I'm just checking all these boxes. And I'm going to set this back to material view. So lighting material is how I view this with the material applied. So let's start to plug all this in. So the base color is going to go into the base color. The displacement is going to go into the height. The normal map is going to go into the normal map. And the roughness is going to go into the roughness. I look at these now. Normal map, height map, and material. So this is looking a bit better than it did just using that direct export. I don't know why, and to be honest, I don't often use that direct export option. I usually do this in a more manual way. I'm going to increase the tiling a bit and get to about here where we were last time, and just offset this a bit again. So if I do compare, this looks actually more detailed than the one we had before. So the preferred approach might be to just import these textures manually. What we want to look at then is how we visualize displacement inside Substance Painter. So right now there's no offset, there's just the mesh edge, there's no displacement happening in this at all. We can do this in our shader settings up here. I'm going to click shader settings, which is the little ball in the middle. If I scroll down and look at displacement, my scale is set to 0. If I set this to 1 or to 0.5, I get a very spiky displacement, and there's not much displacement happening. My subdivision count is 1, so I want to increase this subdivision count to get a more detailed look on the mesh itself. And my scale amount is actually too high, so I'm just going to bring this down and just get it to a point where we start to see some displacement happening away from the edges of the garment. It still looks quite spiky, so we can fix this now that we're in Painter. Like, we've probably got too much detail coming through from our normal map, from our height map. So let's just increase this a little bit. I'm getting some nice kind of thickness around these cables, but there's too much, I feel like, medium and small detail coming through in Painter, which is kind of hard to see sometimes in Sampler, so it might not be until we're in Painter that we see how it's going to look. For now, I think this height of like 0.25 maybe is good to work with. If we want to start to fix this up, I'm going to rename this knit cable, and then right click and add a filter. This filter, I want to only affect the height channel, so I'm just going to unselect all those other channels and just affect the height one. Choose filter, and I'm going to go for blur. And then obviously we can start to blur this. And when I click blur, it's actually blurring everything again. So I'm just going to quickly unclick all of this, and you'll see what we're going to get here. So this is no blur, it's quite spiky. This is a lot of blur, it's all gone away. And we want to find a nice kind of medium point where we get nice, displacement on our cable textures, but not necessarily a super spiky edge. Again, we can tweak all this stuff in Blender before we render everything in the end, but we just want our texturing to be kind of well established before we get into Blender. So I think for now this might be kind of good. Yes. On top of this, I'm going to add a fill. I'm going to call this color overlay. Set it just to color, and then just add in any color you want. So let's say blue, because I like blue. And then I'm going to set the blending of this to blend much more nicely over our mesh, because right now if I look at my base color, I just have blue. The blending of this is here. So this is blending mode is set to normal. If I open this up and go all the way to color in the bottom, it's going to kind of recolor that texture as blue. So now when I look at my material, I have a kind of blue texture to look at. So if you want to then change the color of this knitwear at any point, it's quite easy for us to tweak. And we'll still keep the shadowing and details and everything from the previous texture as well. So that's how we can kind of recolor our garment if we want to. Then one thing to note is obviously we want in our, if we look at this example, our cuff and kind of hem trims and our neck trim is a different material than the body of the garment itself. So if we look here, we want to set this up so that we have these pieces being read by, are reading a different layer. So I have this one called knit cable. I'm going to add in another fill and make sure it goes underneath my color layer, but above my knit cable layer. And we want to set this to just affect these pieces. So we're going to have to do a little bit of masking. I'm going to right click this layer and click add black mask, and it's going to disappear because everything is masked out. Then on the side option here, I have a polygon fill option. So if you look at these brushes on the side, one of them is called polygon fill, it's the square one. Choose the polygon fill, and then we want to click the areas that we want to use this texture in. So I want it on the hem, and I want to set this to UV chunk. So right now I can just select individual polygons, individual triangles, or a mesh fill. We want to do a UV chunk. So that's this final option here. So I can then click the chunks of UV in my UV space, and they will get the texture applied to them. They obviously still have some of the displacement coming through from the other layers because we've only affected the color layer in this. So for this layer, I'm going to also add a black mask. I'm going to right click, add black mask, and then do the same thing. UV chunk, and then I'm just going to select these guys that I want to have the cable applied to, and then we've kind of completely separated these materials. So this way we know that this material is only going to affect these pieces, and this material is only going to affect these pieces. And we have a nice separation of what we want to work on. I'm going to call this one rib trim. And we want to then activate a few more channels with this to start to add some displacement in. So what I've got for this, if I look in my resources folder, is this knit called rib knit. So this is more what the rib trim looks like on a cuff or on a neck trim or something like that. And I want to just drag and drop this into my workspace, set this to texture. Again, I import this into my library, click import, and I now have rib knit. I think I already imported it one time, so I have more than one rib. Now would be a good time to save, so I'm just going to save as, I'll call this knit 2, because like I said, I've already done this one time. And now my file is saved, so if I crash for whatever reason, I can come back to this point. The rib. So choose your rib. Go back up to our texture set, our properties up here. We want to get out of this mask editing mode, and right now I've got this little mask icon clicked. So if I click on my rib trim, I'm going to go back to rib, and then I want to go into, I want to add a height. I have a color channel already, and for now that's enough. I don't have a normal map for this, but I don't really need it. The Substance Painter will convert for me. Drag the rib trim into height, drag it into base color, and then obviously we need to make some considerable changes to the displacement of this because it's gone crazy. So right click again, add filter, select the filter option, click blur. We want this set only to the height, and I'm going to just blur it a little bit to start to take some of the detail. Obviously, it's still projecting really far away from the rest of the mesh. So what we can do is just remove some of this by blending it out. Also, we might want to just look at the orientation of this. So if I go back over here, I'm going to increase the tiling amount quite significantly. so that we get like more straight like ribs. And then I need them to run in the other direction. So I'm just going to hold shift down and just rotate this to like 90 degrees. And that will start to put the ribs going in the right direction. Of course, there's still too much height happening with this. So if I look at my height map, we can see why this is really black and this is really kind of gray. So that's kind of creating this effect. To fix that, I'm going to add a base layer. So if I just drag a new fill right to the bottom and have a height activated, and I set this height to like the mid value of black, I can now kind of blend this on top. So what I mean by that is if I go to my rib trim, I look under my height channel, so drop this menu down from base color to height. This is set to linear dodge by default, and then if I just bring this opacity slider down a bit, I'm going to reduce the intensity of that displacement. So it depends how much we want to preserve. Again, we can look at our height map and see what the best way is. But if I remove that, if I just turn the visibility off this for a second, there's nothing. It's just a black space. If I turn off this base layer, I have nothing underneath it, which is not good. So I'm just going to call this base and then turn this back on. We could set this to something like screen or multiply and see what happens. Leave it as dodge. But then if I look back on my material, I get this effect of my rib trim. There's a couple other things I may want to add on top of this. So the first will be like to fix the roughness, because if I look now at the roughness, it looks for whatever reason still a bit shiny. And again, we don't have any roughness information on here. So on the base, I'm going to activate the roughness channel and set this roughness to a similar gray value as the rest of the shirt, like this, and look back. So it's still a little bit shiny in some areas, I think. So if we want to add a roughness on top of this, we can add another fill layer, set this to roughness, and in this roughness, I'm going to add, let's look for dirt. Let's do this one dirt 4. So for now, if we look at this here, this is the roughness that we're going to get. We just want to create like a bit of noise in the roughness channel, basically. We can change the contrast of this, we can change the scale of this, and then we can start to blend this over. So I'm going to just call this roughness. Go from height to roughness, because I'm now over here editing my roughness channel, and I just want to bring down the roughness of this. And then we can even, I think, invert this so that we're kind of adding more of a white tone on top than we are adding a dark tone. So this is without, and this is with a lot. And I think we want to do something kind of in the middle. Yeah, it might be subtle, but there'll definitely be a bit of detail difference in here. And that's been applied to all the layers because it's outside of these masked layers. The one thing that we then want to look at is if we look here, the displacement is causing separation in our seams. So like I have actual holes appearing in my mesh. And the way we fix this is actually quite simple, because we don't want this to happen when we're in Blender or anything. We need to kind of flatten these edges out. And the way we're going to do this is with a little masking trick again. So I'm going to add another fill layer. I'm going to call this edges, just so I know what it is. I'm going to set it to height only and turn off the color map. And by default, this height is set to linear dodge, so it's blending. So like if I look at my height channel up here, it's blending this height value on top of everything. I'm going to set this to normal. So now I've just got like a flat black height map. And then all my displacement is gone, which is good because we just want to remove it from some of these edges. We don't want to remove it from everywhere. So now we need to mask these edges. So I'm going to right click on the edges one. I'm going to click add a black mask. I'm going to, with the mask selected, right click and add a fill. And to the fill, we want to look for UV border. So I'm just going to type in up there UV border, and then there's this one called UV border distance. And if we want to look at what this mask is doing, I can open up my viewport options up here, scroll all the way down and click on mask. And this is what my mask is now doing. So if I bring the balance down, you'll see we're starting to select some of the edges of the pattern pieces. If I push the contrast up, it's going to get a sharper edge on here. If I do the smoothness, it's going to kind of separate that edge, which I don't want to do. And if I choose distance, it's going to start to push this further away. What you will see though is we get this kind of geometric thing happening. So we want to, again, take this away a bit with some blurring. So I'm going to right click on this mask. I'm going to click add filter. Again, drop the filter menu down and add a blur. And now you'll see we're starting to blur some of this out. So I'm just going to push this up a bit. And then we could even right click, add a levels, and then bring down our white value a bit to just make the edge select a bit more specific. So if we then now go and look at our material, those edges that were separated before should have now joined back together and flattened out a bit. This is without the edge fix. We have the holes everywhere. With the edge fix, we have this removed. Again, we can control the intensity of this right through the levels, blur, and the distance of the border select. And then we can look under here and look at the height value that we're applying to it. So we could push it in, we could push it out. You might want to indent things slightly. You might want to then tweak, the border distance, make it a bit smaller, make it a bit bigger. But the goal is to just use this to kind of fix those edges. So when we then look at the height map, you'll see that the displacement texture has kind of been erased around those edges, and it's not going to offset them, in the same way that it is in the body. It's going to kind of flatten things out towards the seam. So if you do have that problem, which you most likely will do, this is how you fix it. So this looks pretty good for now. It's not the ideal displacement that I would want, but we can adjust that a bit in Blender as well. I just want to make sure I have enough data to start to work with in my other areas. I think the ribs look too bright, so I'm just going to look at my rib trim, right click, let's add a levels. The levels is set to base color, and let's see if we can just darken it up a bit more like this. And then maybe we just increase the tiling a little bit. 32. So this looks a lot more even now. If I go back, that's what we had before, and with the levels, let's redo. Yeah, then this is kind of a bit more consistent in terms of color. So this is now ready to, I'm going to save it, and this is ready to export. So I'm going to go File, Export Textures, and the settings I use for this is this output template of PBR metallic roughness, but there's one thing we have to check. If I go to the output templates, scroll down to the one that says PBR metallic roughness. So this is the same one as this, this list of templates is this list of templates, they're the same. And if we look at normal, even though we set the project up as OpenGL, it's giving me a DirectX normal export, which is not what I want. I want an OpenGL one. So to fix this, simply drag this OpenGL option into this option here, the purple one. Drop it in, choose RGB channels, and now I have a blue box next to my OpenGL. I have a blue box next to my normal, so I know that this blue is this texture here, and I'm exporting the OpenGL option correctly for use in Blender. Go back to settings, and then I'm going to export this into the folder that I need to. So that's over here to painter exports, and let's just make a new subfolder. Blue. Open this up, select folder, and then this is now ready to export. So I'm just going to click export, and that's exported all the channels that I need to use in Blender. So in the next part of this, I'm going to show you how to bring everything into Blender, how to apply on top of this a system for the fuzz and the fur and everything that is used in geometry nodes, how to set the render settings up for this in a good way, a bit of compositing, and then the final render settings in the end. And then you guys should have a pretty good workflow for creating knit textures with displacement and geometry nodes. So I hope you guys learned something in this this one about displacement in Substance Painter, Substance Sampler, and then we see how this all connects in Blender in the next part. So I'll see you guys over there.